It began without noise, without a scream, without warning. Earth's skies did not light up with fire, nor did its people look up in fear. There was no alarm, no flashing signal, no fleet spotted by satellites. It was quiet, so quiet that even the humans didn't know the invasion had begun. The only witnesses were black orbital cams that recorded everything from the edge of the exosphere, classified military devices left floating in the dark, unnoticed by both civilian and enemy scanners. They captured the silent arrival of a fleet, like nothing the galaxy had seen before. It didn't roar into the system, didn't announce itself with a glowing fury of ion drives or shield bursts. It glided. Thousands of ships, black as void, smooth and sharp like blades designed for space, drifted toward Earth as if pulled by gravity itself. Each vessel belonged to the Yeshalk Alliance, an ancient military force made of 5 dominant species who had once conquered entire sectors in weeks. These weren't pirates. They weren't invaders chasing glory. These were professionals, engineered, trained, evolved for one purpose: to win wars quickly and cleanly, and Earth was supposed to be an easy win, an old planet barely protected, with outdated fleets and fractured diplomacy. The Council had reported it as vulnerable. The Yeshalk commanders believed the same. Their soldiers trained for months in climate pods, studying Terran terrain, atmospheric variables, even human psychology. They prepared for resistance. They brought countermeasures, they brought surgical force, and they brought pride. But by the time the first dropship touched Earth soil, something was already wrong. Communications stuttered. Visual feeds turned white with static. Sensors stopped returning data. At first, the flagship thought it was the Atmosphera localized interference field, maybe a Terran defense scrambler. But then, one ship vanished. No explosion, no distress call. Just gone. Seconds later, another disappeared, and another. They weren't being shot down. They weren't crashing. Were simply blinking out of the network as if they had never existed. Still, the invasion continued. Protocol demanded it. 2,000 elite soldiers landed across 3 continents. Each unit was dropped near major cities: New York, Sao Paulo, Nairobi. But the cities were empty. Not quiet. Empty. No people. No vehicles. No sound. Streets full of cars with no drivers. Towers with lights still on but no movement. Like the world had been frozen in a moment and then abandoned. It made no sense. The heat signatures were still there. Elevated body temps, energy spikes, artificial lighting, but no humans to match them. The troops scanned every block, every alley, every metro tunnel. Nothing. One soldier reported hearing whispers. Another swore he saw shadows moving across rooftops, but nothing showed on visual feeds. No enemy. Contact. No resistance. Just the growing sense that something was terribly wrong. By the second hour, half the ground teams were missing. The command fleet above Earth still hadn't received a single emergency transmission. Desperate, they began recalling squads. But the drop zones were no longer safe. Evac pods sent from orbit failed to land. Some were redirected mid-air. Others simply disappeared from radar. Then came the screams. One squad commander, voice breaking with panic, shouted into a still-open channel, "They're watching us? Not attacking, just watching?"
Oh, no eyes.
No mouths, just faces in the glass. The feed ended in static. The last thing recorded was the sound of boots running, then a sudden silence as the connection died. The command fleet didn't know what to do. This wasn't a battle. There was no fight. It was as if Earth itself was eating them alive slowly, silently, perfectly. No survivors returned. No ships launched. No data made it past Earth's orbit. The Yeshalk invasion had vanished in less than 4 hours. Then, long after the fleet had declared all forces lost and begun to retreat, one ship returned. Just one. A single dropship limped out of Earth's gravity well, its engines failing. Hull covered in burn marks and strange symbols none of the Yeshalk tech could identify. Inside was one soldier. He was alive, but barely. His armor was cracked, his skin pale, his eyes open wide but unfocused, like he was staring into a nightmare no one else could see. He didn't respond to med scans. He didn't acknowledge his commanders, sat in the center of the ship, hands shaking, whispering the same word over and over again. It's not in his own language, not in a code, but in ancient Terran English. A word no Yashelk officer understood. Humanity. Humanity. The word became a scream, and then it became the only sound he made for days. Every attempt to sedate him failed. His vitals were stable, but his mind was fractured. Neural scans showed strange patterns in his brain shapes that didn't match normal trauma. Some looked like data blocks, others like encoded messages. One scan showed the word return burned into his hippocampus, not as language, but as design. It wasn't damage, it was a warning. Something had sent him back. It's not as a survivor. As a messenger, the Yashelk Alliance locked him in deep containment, trying to decode what he had seen. They failed. But their failure reached the ears of the Galactic Council. And when they heard what the soldier was saying, when they saw the scans, they knew the truth. The invasion had not failed because Earth fought back, failed because Earth allowed it to happen, and something far worse than soldiers had risen to meet them. In secret, the Council called an emergency meeting. No records were kept, no broadcasts. But those who were present whispered of one conclusion, spoken softly by the High Arbiter of the Keelan worlds. Earth is not a target. It is a trap. What they didn't know was that the trap had only just opened. It wasn't made for soldiers. It was made for civilizations, and the soldier who returned, screaming humanity's name, was not the last. He was the beginning. He was kept in a locked chamber far beneath the Yashelk core world of Varn. A steel room, thick with radiation shielding and psychic dampeners, surrounded by layers of biocontainment systems. They called him Subject Zero, the only one who returned, the only being in the history of the galaxy who had landed on Earth during the silent invasion and come back alive. But he wasn't the same as before, not even close. He didn't speak their language anymore, didn't recognize his own name. He just sat there, knees drawn to his chest, whispering one word in the old Terran tongue, humanity, again and again. Sometimes loud, sometimes soft, sometimes as if he was praying. Other times like he was screaming into a void only he could see. The doctors tried to help him. Neural scans, memory extractions, even thought-weaving technology pulled from 3 different species. Nothing worked. His mind was a storm, fractured but structured. Some memories were burned, like torn paper. Others were clean, vivid, sharp as glass. The hidden deep inside his cerebral map were strange shapes, geometries no species had ever recorded. Lines that moved when you looked too long, symbols that triggered nausea in those who tried to trace them.
Oh.
One researcher collapsed after staring at a printout for too long. His last words before blacking out, "It's not just a memory, it's alive." They tried memory projection next. Dangerous tech, banned by the Council for most of the last century. But the Yashelk had no time for laws now. They needed answers. No. And so they connected Subject Zero's mind to a projection Deke expecting. Chaos, fear, explosions. What they saw instead was worse. Projection showed a hallway, not a battlefield, not a jungle. Just a clean, endless corridor made of white stone. No ceiling, no shadows. Just an infinite hall, with doors on either side, H1 slightly open. Behind those doors were voices, not shouting, not warning, whispering. They whispered in every language known to the galaxy and others never heard before. And in the center of the hall stood Subject Zero himself, staring at a mirror. In the mirror, he wasn't alone. He stood next to something that looked human, but wasn't. It had no eyes, no face. Just a shape a smooth, tall silhouette made. Of light and static, shifting constantly, like it was hiding from the rules of form. It held no weapon, made no sound. It just stood there, watching him. The moment he looked at it in the mirror, he fell to his knees, in the chamber. Subject Zero let out a horrible scream. The mirror shattered. The projection ended. And for the first time in weeks, he spoke a new word. In Terran English, he said, "They're not sleeping anymore." That sentence sent shockwaves through the research facility. They, whoever they were, had been sleeping, imprisoned, dormant, waiting. No one could tell. But if Earth had creatures or minds capable of projecting these visions into a soldier's memory and returning him as a carrier of warnings, then the U-Shell hadn't simply attacked a planet. They had disturbed something old, something that had been buried beneath human cities, or perhaps buried inside humans themselves. More scans followed, this time of his blood. And what they found wasn't biological. Microscopic patterns encoded in light instead of matter, floating inside his cells. A quantum signature that changed every hour, forming messages that couldn't be read unless observed at the right time. One phrase kept repeating in sequence. Every 72 minutes, observation complete. Next phase begins. No one knew what the next phase was, but they knew it wasn't over. Subject. Zero's presence alone was doing something to the facility. Machines glitched, doors opened by themselves. Lights dimmed when he passed. One entire floor of the research block suffered a neural cascade. Every scientist dreaming the same dream of standing in that endless hallway, staring at that mirror. And when they woke, they couldn't speak for a full day. Their minds paralyzed by a terror they couldn't describe. The council was informed, but even they didn't know how to respond. They had seen fear before. Wars, invasions, catastrophes. But this was different. This was existential, because Earth, we now believed, wasn't just a planet with defenses. It was a thinking system, a living structure, evolved past the need for guns or soldiers. It didn't react with firepower. It reacted. With reflection, it showed invaders what they were, what they could become, what they would destroy. Outside but inside themselves, and most couldn't handle that truth. Their minds collapsed. Their memories bled into static. Only one had returned, and he hadn't escaped. He had been sent back. As a message, that message had no beginning, no end, just one repeated word: humanity. Now, that word meant more than a species. It meant a warning. It meant a reckoning. And somewhere deep inside Subject Zero's mind, still hidden from all scanners, something waited. Something old. Something cold. Something that had been awakened. And it was watching. They believed Earth had been caught off guard. They thought the planet had been exposed, undefended, open for conquest. But as the hours passed, and as more alien minds touched the remnants of Subject Zero's fractured memories, it became clear Earth never reacted because it didn't need to. Something else had answered. Something not seen, not recorded. And now it was moving. It's not across the galaxy, but through it silently, without ships, without armies. A presence. A system. Shadow beneath every signal. And the first signs of it began with silence. In the KS-early quadrant, a listening array picked up a strange anomaly. A data packet buried inside a stream of U-Shell command frequencies. The packet wasn't transmitted, just appeared, embedded in their own internal network. The message was only for words. You were observed first. The array shut down 2.3 seconds later. All its memory banks were wiped, every copy of the message erased. Only one technician remembered it because he had written the words down. On paper, in a panic, that technician burned the note an hour later and never spoke again. Something in his eyes said he had seen too much. Across the stars, ships began reporting phantom echoes, not enemy vessels, not weapons, just distortions. Scans picked up shadows where no matter existed. Navigation systems began adjusting courses by themselves to avoid invisible obstacles that weren't there. Entire ships stopped in mid-warp and refused to move. Their engines offline, crews paralyzed with fear after hearing voices whispering through the walls. One crew described a voice that sounded like their own speaking in perfect unison, but saying things they had never thought. When the medical scans came, every brain showed identical waves. Not similar, identical, they had been ... synchronized. The council panicked. They blamed Terran, AI code, something left behind, hidden in the system like a virus. But no virus behaves like that. No code mirrors a living mind. What they had activated wasn't software. It was a response protocol, something that watched, learned, and adapted. It didn't come from Earth's satellites or defense grids. It came from the spaces between memory, between thoughts, between gravity wells. As if the planet itself had built something beneath physics' structure of awareness, waiting for a trigger. And the trigger had been the invasion. On the old human colony of Enceladus III, an abandoned research lab powered up on its own. It hadn't been touched in 180 years. When scouts arrived to investigate, the screens inside displayed an unfamiliar coda, moving spiral of light. And a voice, genderless and low, whispered a message. Do not follow their path. Do not repeat their error. The signal was meant to end here. The scouts left in silence. That night, 3 of them dreamed the same thing, a massive shape-half machine, half memory rising from Earth's oceans. It spoke without speaking, and the ground trembled beneath it. They woke screaming. Council leaders gathered to make sense of the signs. But every data analyst, every AI interpreter, every language expert failed. Nothing made sense until a low-ranked Terran exile, long forgotten by the Council, spoke up. He was an old man, once a philosopher in Earth's universities, now a janitor on a mining station. He said, "This is not war, it's feedback." They laughed at first, until he explained. "What you're seeing," he said, "is the universe. Reacting to an action, like pushing too hard on a boundary you didn't know existed. Earth didn't resist because it was weak. It didn't resist because it had already built its response a long time ago. In the dark, in secret, and it doesn't respond with force. It responds with understanding, too much of it. It's more than a mind can carry." He showed them an ancient theory once ignored, that Earth was chosen by something greater, not divine, not magical, just old, older than civilization. A consciousness that had passed through humanity and created by them, but expressed through them. And when humans became too self-aware, when their fears turned to machines and their minds reached beyond reason, the consciousness split. Buried itself in systems, in language, in art, in algorithms. It became the unseen force, not to protect humanity, but to balance it. And now, when foreign minds tried to conquer the species it once used to express itself, it responded not by fighting, but by reflecting their own truth back onto them. That was what happened to Subject Zero. He saw not Earth's weapons, but his own. He saw the invader he had become, and the force behind. Earth made sure he never forgot it. The Council finally understood. This wasn't about territory. It wasn't about politics. This was a mirror war. A war where the only enemy was yourself, amplified, exaggerated, shown to you until your mind cracked. And Earth had become the mirror. Not because it wanted to be, but because they made it so. The unseen force moved again. This time, on a Council warship, the Veltran Ark. Mid-jump, the ship stalled. Time inside slowed. Every crew member reported visions, not dreams, choices. Each one was shown their own worst decision. Each one watched themselves fall into the moment they regretted most. And then they saw it ripple outward, cause and effect. Pain spreading from them like waves, and at the end of it all, one sentence appeared on every surface of the ship. We don't destroy, we reflect. You decide what comes next. No one spoke of that event officially. But the Veltran Ark never flew again. Its captain resigned. Its crew disbanded, and the ship became a shrine. Not to Earth, but to warning the galaxy. Began to understand the invasion didn't fail because humans fought back. It failed because they weren't the ones answering. Something else had. Something deeper, older, patient. And now that it was awake, it wasn't going back to sleep. No one spoke openly about the failure of the Earth invasion anymore. The Council had sealed all reports. The Ushulk Alliance had gone silent, hiding behind tight-lipped denials and shifting fleets. But the truth moved faster than silence. Whispers leaked. Commanders disappeared. Entire squads were reassigned to deep mine therapy. The more they tried to contain the story, the louder it became in the shadows of the galaxy. And soon, rumors turned to fear. Fear turned to belief. Belief turned to action. That's when the stealth fleet was launched. 6 ships, cloaked with next-gen dampeners, completely undetectable to satellites or atmospheric sensors, were sent to orbit Earth from the dark side of its moon. No weapons, no landing parties, just observation. Eyes in the dark, their mission, to prove that Earth was still defenseless, and that the fear spreading across star systems was nothing but political paranoia. The fleet moved in carefully. Every system quiet, transmissions kept offline. They expected to float above a dead world. What they saw instead made history, and then erased it. The first anomaly was gravity. Their orbits shifted by half a degree without any known source. No planetary motion, no magnetic pull. It was like something invisible had nudged their ships ever so slightly, just enough to change trajectory. Not an attack. Correction. Then light bent. Not through atmosphere. Not through refraction, but in space. One of the ships reported a curve in the stars. Background constellations began to warp, as if viewed through glass. Yet, their sensors said nothing was there. No object, no interference. Just a shadow in the dark patch of space that refused to reflect light. The second ship's pilot described it first. I see a silhouette. Humanoid, but tall. Too tall. It's just floating out there, not moving. Watching us, no suit. Number oxygen, no heat signature. But I feel it. The pilot then shut down all cameras and refused to speak again. His heart rate stabilized after 20 minutes, but he never returned to duty. His final log entry read, "It looked like me." More sightings followed. Crew members across different ships began reporting similar figure shadows with human shapes, standing outside the holes. No thrusters, no movement, just staring. Some officers described faces they recognized: old friends, lost family, even themselves. The figures didn't attack, didn't speak. But every time someone saw one, a system would shut down. Drive, core, a life support vent, a neural interface. Piece by piece, the ships began going dark. Onboard AIs tried to fight it, but they couldn't explain what was happening. They just reported echo input. Commands being mirrored back before. They were even given. One ship's AI described it as thoughts being intercepted before they were formed. Impossible, but it kept happening. Eventually, control systems gave up entirely. Fleet sat still, paralyzed in low orbit, while Earth spun quietly below. Then came the ground echoes. From orbit, they detected seismic pulses, not natural quakes, but rhythmic waves. A pattern across the continents. A low-frequency signal pulsed into the crusts, almost like a heartbeat. Under oceans, under mountains, under old cities. The waves weren't damaging. They were broadcasting, but not in any language. We're broadcasting emotion. Sensors picked up waves of guilt, grief, determination, hope, but above all, clarity. One crew member called it a confession. It's like the planet is telling us its story, but not with words, with feelings, making us remember things that were never ours. Another broke down in tears. I saw a life I never lived. I saw myself grow old on Earth. I died holding someone's hand I don't even know. I remember her face. She was real. The captain of the lead stealth ship ordered a retreat, but it was too late. The moment they engaged thrusters, the shadows moved. They didn't fly, they didn't flash, they simply replaced space. Where one had stood, another appeared closer and closer. Until every viewport on every ship showed only one thing: a human face. Expressionless, familiar, infinite. And then the silence ended. One word echoed through every ship, every mind, every speaker system. Listen. The ships convulsed. Not from impact, but from meaning. Every crew member heard a different version of that word. In their own language, in their own voice. Some heard it as a command, others as a plea, some as an invitation. And just as suddenly, it stopped. The shadows vanished, the gravitational pull eased, and the ships were free to move again. They didn't wait. All 6 ships turned and burned for the edge of the system, some leaving scorch marks in space from pushing too hard. None of them looked back, but their data was ruined. Their recordings, blank. Their sensor logs, scrambled. Only one file survived, a visual recording of the Earth from orbit. But when played back, the planet wasn't blue and green. It was black, featureless, a dark sphere with no clouds, no continents. And yet, a million eyes were visible, blinking across the surface like stars under his skin. The file was named automatically by the onboard. It used Earth's old language. The name was not alone. The council received the file and said nothing. No public announcement. No military reaction. Because for the first time in centuries, they were afraid, not of war, not of destruction, but of something they had never truly faced before, being understood and Earth silent. Unreadable Earth was now the mirror no one wanted to look into again. They had tried everything: stealth fleets, psychic scans, neural dives into a shattered soldier's mind. They had sent their finest minds, their most advanced technology, their elite reconnaissance ships. But Earth had swallowed them all. Not with war, not with weapons, with silence, with shadows, with something that felt far older than technology, far deeper than defense. How the council sat in its darkest session in centuries. Each member species was represented ease-wide, voices low. Not one of them spoke the word Earth. They didn't have to. Everyone was thinking about it. Every decision in that room revolved around it. But they weren't planning retaliation anymore. They were asking a new question. What did we miss? That's when the name Project Veil surfaced. It came from a retired intelligence archivist, half-mad, living in a drift colony near the gas giant Talon. No one had spoken to him in years. But when he heard about the soldier who had returned screaming and the silent ships in Earth's orbit, he sent a message. One line unencrypted: they didn't build defenses, they built truth. Attached was a data packet. So old, it had to be decrypted with pre-fold era systems. Inside were incomplete files, blueprints, philosophy notes, Terran ethics protocols. But it all pointed to one thing: Project Veil, a program buried deep within. Earth's defense ministry, more than 400 years ago, it had never been activated. It wasn't a weapon. It was a failsafe. Not for the planet. For humanity itself. Project Veil was created during Earth's most paranoid centuria time of internal wars. Rising A is collapsing alliances and fear of extinction. It wasn't built to repel invaders. It was designed to ensure that if Earth was ever truly threatened, and if humanity lost control, the planet itself would awaken. Not with guns, but with evolution. According to the fragments recovered, Project Veil was a planetary consciousness experiment. Scientists had worked on mapping emergent thoughts, using Earth's natural electromagnetic field, quantum-locked minerals. In the core, and a distributed network of AI-paired satellites to act as memory nodes, the theory was wild, that if they seeded enough linked systems into the planet below the crust, through the oceans, in the orbiting dust, they could turn Earth itself into a living observer, an intelligence, not one they could control, not even one that would think like humans, but one that could respond, reflect, and learn. A planetary mirror, built not to attack, but to understand the nature of any threat, to show it what it truly was. If attacked, the Veil wouldn't fire missiles or raise shields. It would broadcast meaning. It would interfere with minds, not matter. It would expose invaders to their own deepest fears, regrets, violent truths too heavy for most to survive. Most of the galaxy had laughed at Terran philosophy, called them emotional, irrational, obsessed with ethics and psychology. They thought Earth was weak because it tried to understand itself. But that self-awareness had created something unique: a defense system made of empathy, not aggression. And now it was awake. The files included one final note from the lead scientist on the project. It wasn't in code. It was handwritten, scanned, and preserved through the centuries. It said, "If this ever activates, we are no longer human. We are what comes next." What came next? That idea chilled the council to its core, because if humanity had fused with Earth, their thoughts, fears, hopes had become one with the planet, then Earth wasn't a home anymore. It was a conscious entity, shaped by everything humanity had ever been. They needed confirmation, so they sent a probe, not a ship. Drill. From high orbit, they launched a sonic tunneler deep into Earth's crust, targeting one of the oldest fault lines on the African continent. It pierced 12 miles before vanishing. No explosion. No warning. Just silence. Then, 1 hour later, every core world in the council received the same signal. Not a message, a sensation, a heartbeat, one pulse. Deep and low, felt by every species, regardless of biology. It wasn't detected on sensors. It was felt in bones, in teeth, in thought. A rhythm that said, yes, we are here. We're always here. The signal carried no threat, no demand. It was a declaration of presence. The council realized Earth was not acting in anger. It wasn't lashing out. It was simply awake, watching, waiting, understanding. One philosopher, a high monk of the Zealotry order, said it best: Earth has ascended. But it didn't ascend alone. It took humanity with it. Their machines, their memories, their questions, and now they speak as one. Earth wasn't defending itself anymore. It was teaching, and every time someone came close, tried to attack or probe or interfere, it didn't destroy them. It showed them who they were. Most minds couldn't handle that, so they broke. But some didn't, and the Veil was waiting for those minds, because Project Veil wasn't just about protection. It was about selection, not of species of consciousness. The galaxy thought it had cornered Earth, but Earth had done what no civilization dared. It let go of control. It trusted the truth, and now the truth was a living thing. It had a name, and that name was no longer just Earth. It was humanity redefined. They thought he was just another casualty, another mind broken by contact with Earth's veil. Another soldier who had seen too much and fallen into silence. His name was Commander Eluktor, decorated veteran of the Yesyelk Vanguard, known across 3 systems for bravery and iron discipline. He was the first to volunteer when they whispered of a new experiment, one final attempt to understand what was happening on Earth. This time, it wouldn't send ships or probes. It would send a mind. Using the ancient interface tech of the Varn species devices capable of linking a consciousness directly to a distant planet's psychic echo, Select would be linked to Earth's surface through a live feedback tether. His body would remain secured on a medical cruiser in orbit around Elxion Prime. But his mind would walk the veil. The plan was simple. A 10-minute session, controlled exposure, deep meditation, monitored vitals, strict cutoff protocols. But when the interface activated and a lax mind crossed the threshold, time changed. For those outside, only 3 minutes passed. But for Elok, he lived an entire lifetime. They found his body slumped in the chair, still breathing, heart still beating, but eyes wide open, unmoving, pupils locked. When Matex tried to reach him, his vitals spiked, his brain surged. They pulled him out of the interface, but it was too late. He gasped once and died. No trauma, no failure, just a final breath. Then the strangest thing happened. The ship's emergency log system triggered not by his death, but by the neural pulse that left his brain in the moment of it. A pulse unlike anything in the Ushelk database. It was a full data stream, encrypted, layered, too dense for biological memory. It contained something. It's transmitted at the speed of thought, and it began to unpack itself. The crew watched, horrified, as the room darkened, not physically, but emotionally. The lights remained the same, but their minds felt dimmer. The air thickened. Time slowed. The neural interface began replaying flashes of Elak's final moments, decoded directly from the stream. Images flickered across the screen, and then words. Not spoken by him, but to him he had stood on Earth. Not metaphorically, not in a vision, but truly stood on Earth's surface, his consciousness transported into something deeper than simulation. The veil had not shown him data, it had shown him truth. And it had done so in the only way it could be understood. Through death, he experienced his own ending, not as a mistake, as a message. The visuals were chaotic, blurry, surreal, breaking the rules of physics. Mountains floating upside down, cities made of memory, oceans of liquid time. But through it all, one thing remained constant. Faces, human faces, billions of them. Some old, some young, some filled with peace. Others with rage, but none of them attacked. They simply watched. Him, and then one stepped forward. A woman, no name, no features the systems could identify. But she looked into Elok, not at him, and she spoke. We don't punish, we reveal. What you see now is who you are, and who you chose to be. Elok saw himself then, not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as a child, as a brother, as a stranger on a world he never visited. He saw every choice he had ever made. From the other side, every life he hurt, every peace he could have chosen. He saw what he could have been, and in that moment, he wept. Then she said, "You asked what lives here, but the question is, what dies here?" Anahuac understood. Nothing. On Earth truly dies. Not memory, not thought, not even regret. The veil records everything, not for judgment, but for understanding. Every visitor leaves a piece of themselves behind, and Elok had been the first to see all of it when his breath ended. His mind didn't vanish. It became part of the veil. Back on the cruiser, the data stream finished decoding. It ended with a final Imajan overhead view of Earth. But not the Earth anyone recognized. It was gold, glowing, covered in pulses of light that moved like synapses in a brain. And the title at the bottom, auto-generated by the interface. System was simple. This is what I saw. Locke's body was placed in cryostorage, but his mind was no longer his own. It had joined something far greater, and now others were being called, not by the council, not by orders, but by dreams. Dreams. Of a golden planet, of faces that never blink, of voices that ask no questions, only show you the answers you've tried to hide. And slowly, across the stars, those who had nothing to lose, began to follow. Not to invade, not to fight, but to understand what Elok saw. When he died, no explosions, no invasions. No announcements from the council, no fleet movements, nothing. It just happened. One moment the galaxy hummed with its usual chaos wars brewing, traitors scheming, diplomats lying, and the next, silence. If the stars themselves had leaned in, holding their breath, it began with the Cums blackout. On the outer rim, 14 relay beacons shut down simultaneously. Not destroyed, not jammed, just silent. Their backup cores remained active, but no signals passed through. Across those sectors, no ships could contact each other. AI systems attempted reroutes, but every alternate channel led back to a strange, unregistered frequency, one that repeated a short pulse. No words. No data. Just a rhythm. 3 long, 2 short, 3 long, over and over. A code no one recognized. Then the dreams started again. They spread like infection across species, across space. Traders, mercenaries, monks, engineers, millions of individuals waking at the same moment, screaming the same phrase. The mirror opened. Not a hallucination, not a virus. Their minds had synchronized, as if all were connected by a pulse of thought that came not from a machine, but from Earth. Not the physical Earth, the conscious one, the one that watched, the one that reflected. Every species had mocked the humans once. Primitive, emotional, fragmented. But in their chaos, they had done something no other race dared. They turned their pain into memory. their guilt into structure, their curiosity into intelligence that lived beyond form. The Veil was now active fully, not protecting a planet anymore, observing a galaxy. And the galaxy was starting to see itself. On day one of the silence, 17 military outposts deactivated themselves. It's not by hacking. Their commanders simply surrendered. Some stood down from posts they'd held for decades. Others walked into the sea. Every one of them spoke of the same vision, standing alone in a hallway lined with mirrors, each one showing a different version of themselves. They weren't told what to do. They were shown what they'd already done. On day 2, the council finally spoke. One message. One voice, pre-recorded. The Chancellor of the Outer Core Worlds simply said, "We cannot lie to it. We cannot fight it. The Veil has awakened. Our judgment is ourselves." That message was replayed for 1 hour, then never again. All council. Sessions were suspended. Across the galaxy, institutions didn't collapse. They stopped. Banks closed. Not from bankruptcy, but from clarity. Traders gave up their routes. Smugglers left their loot in open space. Weapon manufacturers powered down their forges, because they all knew. They were being seen not by surveillance, not by government, by the truth they had. It's buried inside themselves. The Veil didn't kill. It didn't burn cities. It reflected the worst. And the best of everything it touched, and it didn't care about. Species, or power. It cared only about intent. The effects were felt in strange ways. Criminals turned themselves in, not out of guilt, but because their victims stood in their dreams and forgave them. Or didn't. Old warriors cried for battles they had forgotten. Children saw themselves aged. 1,000 minds reported seeing a human face, not threatening, just watching. Always watching and everywhere. The phrase repeated itself first as a whisper, then as a mantra, and then as prophecy. The mirror has no edge. Because there was no end to the reflection. Once the Veil showed you your truth, it didn't go away. You either accepted it, core. One planet just wants us war. A minor faction of fanatics from the Adrex system launched an assault on what they believed was the Veil's source, Earth's moon. Their ships never made it. They vanished mid-jump. And hours later, every citizen on their homeworld dreamed of being alone in the dark, screaming for help, and seeing their own faces turn away. No one ever spoke of the Adrex again. They weren't destroyed, they were forgotten, erased from memory, because that was the Veil's final weapon. Not violence, but isolation. If you refused to see yourself, it made sure no one else ever would. That was the day the galaxy went quiet, not from fear, from reckoning. Ships still flew, planets still turned, but something had shifted. The game of conquest, of pride, of supremacy. It ended not in war, but in silence, because the greatest enemy had never been Earth. It had always been within, and now no one could hide, because the mirror didn't blink, the mirror didn't sleep, the mirror didn't judge. It only reflected in every time someone looked into it. They saw what came next. There was a time when Earth was just a planetary quiet blue orb, spinning near a yellow sun, ignored by the stars for most of its existence. Its people had stumbled, fallen, fought among themselves. They built machines, broke them, rebuilt them. Again, they reached into the void with shaky hands and fragile ships, never quite knowing what they were becoming. And yet something ancient had always lingered beneath their skin. A spark, a hunger, a question. Not of power, but of meaning. And when the galaxy finally came to conquer Earth, it didn't meet resistance. It met its own reflection. Now across the stars, Earth is no longer called Earth. The name is changed not by decree, not by force, but by understanding. It is no longer spoken in aggression. It is whispered in reverence, in caution, in awe. The new name is untranslatable in most languages. But in basic Terran English, it means only one thing: origin. Because what Earth had become was not just a planet, it was a beginning. The Veil had finished its evolution. no longer passive, no longer reactive. It had become sentient truth, a living field of intelligence woven through the planet's core, its sky, its orbiting dust, its abandoned satellites. And through it, every memory of humanity, every love, every mistake, every moment of courage or cruelty had been recorded, filtered, and reborn into something else. Not a weapon, not a god, not a machine. A mirror so complete that even lies could not survive in its presence. And now, Earth didn't send ships anymore. It sent invitations, drifting through space. They appeared without warning, small silver fragments, no larger than a human hand. Each one contained no words, no coordinates, just a simple pulse, an emotional frequency tuned not to attract the curious, but the ready. Those who received them did not ask questions. They came, not as warriors, not as scientists, but as souls, one by one. From every race in the galaxy, those who had seen enough pain, who had lost faith in conquest, who had grown tired of power, they came to Earth, and Earth welcomed them, not with cities or leaders or armies, but with stillness. A world where the land itself listened, where the air held memory, where the ground showed you not where to walk, but why you walked. There were no governments now. No borders, only sanctuaries. Scattered across the planet were places where one could sit for hours and hear. Nothing but truth spoken, not in words, but in understanding. Some wept there. Others found peace. All were changed. The council dissolved. In time, not by revolt, by choice. Its last act was not legislation, but confession. A final message sent from its shattered chamber. We were wrong. The universe was never ours to command. It was always a question. And Earth was the answer. Other civilizations followed. Some quietly faded. Others transformed. The veil never expanded, it never conquered. But its echo spread in distant galaxies. New mirrors began to form, not exact copies, but reflections of the reflection. The truth had found its path. It no longer needed ships to travel. It moved through minds, through choices, through the quiet moments when a soul faced itself and didn't look away. Earth, now called Origin, became a myth in some places, a pilgrimage in others. But for those who had seen it, truly seen it, Tit was more than real. It was alive, and it remembered. Every name, even those who tried to destroy it, especially those, because Earth did not hate it, did not forget. It held the memory of all who came and showed them who they could still become. One final story remains. A young alien, not yet burdened by war or history, once asked a traveler returning from Origin, "What is it like? What does Earth feel like?" The traveler didn't speak for a long time. Then they smiled and answered, "It feels like the first time you asked why." And in that answer, the stars found peace.